I think it's quite impressive that you can just ask some people to lead parts of the service and they just do it without any preparation and without knowing in advance that they would be asked. And in a way, it's part of. It comes from education, but it also comes from family. The fact that what I find the most moving tonight is simply the fact that this is one of a few places in the world where different generations can be together and can have a meaningful time together. So, and it links very well to the theme of the Dvar Torah that I wanted to talk about today. The founding Jewish family, the family of Sarah and Abraham. So we know and tell this story to our children and to ourselves every year. And when we learn this family's story, we, I think, inevitably compare this family, the biblical family, with us, with our stories and our families. Am I like Abraham? Am I like Sarah? Sometimes reading the saga of the Jewish family, you can see stories that repeat themselves in different generations. In other words, there are patterns in behavior that recur again and again in the biblical story and in our lives. And I could find two repeating patterns in this week's Torah portion, Hayei Sarah. The first is collective and affecting the entire Jewish people, I think. And the second pattern is a pattern of individual behavior. So in this week's Torah portion, Abraham wanted to buy a burial plot for Sarah after Sarah died. And during the negotiations over the purchase price with local people, Abraham calls himself, Ger v'toshav anachi imachem. I am just a stranger resident among you. So, and this phrase, I think, is significant. Ger v'toshav, stranger resident. So Rabbi Avidan Friedman from Hartman Institute notes that the same phrase for you are strangers and residents, gerim v'toshavim, is used when God explains the rationale behind the institution of the sabbatical and jubilee years. So when you sow in the 8th year, you will still be eating old grain of your crop. Meaning that for 6 years you sow and you collect your harvest and you eat it. But on the 7th year, you should not collect it. You should let it rest. And the land must not be sold beyond reclaim as well. For the land is mine. You are but strangers and residents with me. That's God's words. So no matter how much sovereignty and ownership we enjoy, according to the Torah, we must never forget to act with the humility of the stranger resident. For the whole land belongs not to us, but to God. So Abraham is the one who started this pattern, called himself stranger resident. The pattern of humility towards the land and towards ownership. And the first one to teach this principle of humble sovereignty. I think this principle is relevant today. You are only ready to possess anything when you are prepared to act not as an entitled landlord, but as a humble stranger and resident in it. Even if you legally own anything, you must act as if you borrowed it. There is a good phrase that of uncertain origin, but this phrase, I think, puts this very well. We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And I think it's a good principle to live by. Let's look at another example of a pattern that Abraham and Sarah set for future generations. And we probably repeat it until today. We don't know much about their parents, apart from the fact that they left their parents' house. So the only thing we know about Abraham's family is the fact that Abraham's left them at some point and moved to the land of Canaan. What we do know is how Abraham treated his children. We had two sons. Abraham had two sons, Ishmael, whose mother was Hagar, and Isaac, whose mother was Sarah. We know that Isaac was Abraham's favorite son. And that's by itself a very interesting beginning. So some of these families that are in front of me now have more than one children. And how many of you would be prepared to say that this is my favorite? I don't think many. But that's an interesting principle already. We know that something unpleasant had happened between the boys, and Abraham and Sarah decided to send Ishmael and his mother away to the desert. I can't imagine how it feels like to be sent away and rejected by your father. This was the moment when God stepped in and supported Hagar and Ishmael, promising to protect them and make Ishmael a great nation. So after this story, the name of Ishmael disappears from the text. So we don't know anything about his and his mother's life. Abraham's second son, Isaac, went through a different trauma. The story of Akedah, the bounding of Isaac, when God tested Abraham and asked him to sacrifice Isaac. Most of us know the story quite well. He nearly did it, but then the angel stepped in and Abraham was stopped at the last moment. After this event, the name of Isaac disappears from the text. Abraham comes home alone to learn about the death of Sarah. But where is Isaac? We don't know. What did this event do to his life, to his self-perception, to relationship with his father? But a tiny detail in the text might shed some light on the story and tell us what happened to Isaac after the traumatic experience of Akedah. So what happened to Isaac after Akedah? We know that Abraham didn't sacrifice him. We know that he is alive. So Isaac appears back in the narrative when he comes to his mother's funeral. This is what the Torah says about him. Isaac came from the way of Be'er Lechairoi, for he lived in the land of the south. So this place, Be'er Lechairoi, where is it? What do we know about it? Why does Torah tell us that he came from there? This place only mentioned 3 times in the entire Tanakh, and only once before this. And this is when. And the angel of the Eternal One said to Agar, to Hagar, "You are pregnant and will bear a son, and you will name him Ishmael," which means God have heard you. because the Eternal One has heard your affliction. And she called the name of the Eternal One who spoke to her El Roi. For she said, would I have believed to see an angel here in the wilderness after having seen angels in the house of Abraham? So the well where it happened was called Be'er L'chai Roi, the well of the appearance of the living angel. So from this text, we learn that this place, Be'er L'chai Roi, is a very important place for Hagar. It's a formative place, an important place for Ishmael's life and for his mother. And I would like to make a guess. Where do you go when you just had a massive conflict with somebody? You go to a familiar place. You go somewhere that you know. You go to the place of comfort where something good happened to your life in the past. So, and this is the guest. I think it's not unlikely that Hagar and Ishmael went back there, to that place, after Abraham and Sarah rejected them and sent them away. Is it possible then that after the trauma of Akedah, Isaac didn't want to see his father again, but instead went to visit his brother Ishmael? Why would Torah mention Be'er L'chai Roi then, if it wasn't the case? Traumatic experiences often force us to think of what's essential and to probably rethink our priorities. What made you happy when you were a child? Most likely, it was not the status or possessions of your parents, but the quality time you spent with people you love, building relationship and spending time with those you care about the most. Conflicts and traumatic experiences can become our patterns, can repeat themselves. This little detail in the Torah, I think, reminds us that such experiences don't have to become patterns or burdens. Instead, they can become a force and inspiration to build or rebuild relationships, reconcile with our families, and spend time with those we love. Escalation of any conflict becomes apparent after a significant change. When this happens, you don't have to repeat the pattern. The shock of a sudden change can be an inspiration to break the cycle of violence and conflict, not to repeat it. And this phrase, the most repeated phrase in the Torah, remember that you were the strangers in the land of Egypt, therefore do not oppress the stranger. If you were bullied, doesn't mean you need to bully others. If you were the strangers and oppressed, you don't have to oppress others. Break the pattern, change. Sometimes we must remind ourselves that we are not owners, but strangers and residents in this world. We have unique ability to step outside, see our lives from a distance, recognize our patterns, and find the strength to break the cycle of self-repeating events and turn them into blessings, into the influence for peace and reconciliation for us and generations after us, and hopefully for all humanity. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will.